Good afternoon, and thank you for joining Ada for this webinar on navigating the financial impact of disasters. My name is Amanda Leck, and I'm the Executive Director of the Australian Institute for Disaster Resilience, and I'm delighted to be your host today. I wish to start by acknowledging that I'm hosting this event from the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I also acknowledge the traditional custodians of the various lands on which you all join us from today, and the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders peoples participating in this event. I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the land and waters across Australia. I will introduce our speaker shortly, but before I do, I would like to provide you with some very brief housekeeping notes. Today's event will be recorded and made available after the event. Today, we will be using the Q&A feature on Zoom to take questions. So please post your questions into the Q&A and not the chat window. You will be asked to upvote questions by clicking the thumbs up button, and I will do my best to ask questions of our speakers following the presentation. I encourage you to use the chat window to share any thoughts or reflections during the presentations, and just a reminder that you will need to select all panellists and attendees in the drop-down menu for everyone to be able to view your messages today. I would also like to remind you to please be respectful of each other and our presenters when posting your comments and questions. So please join me in welcoming our first speaker for today, Julie Barrow from Financial Counselling Australia. Julie is a passionate consumer advocate and experienced financial counsellor specialising in family violence with a lens on economic abuse. Julie was successful in advocating to the state government for implementation of instalment payments for vehicle registrations in Victoria. Julie was the former chair of the Financial Counselling Victoria Board from 2016 to 2019, joining the board as treasurer in September 2019, during which time she served as the Victorian State Representative on the Financial Counselling Australia Representative Council. Over to you, Julie.
Thank you, Amanda. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which I'm meeting today, the Wathaurong people, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging. And we'll start the presentation with the next slide, please. Okay, so today I'll cover what is financial counselling, what our role at Financial Counselling Australia is in recovery, how we've engaged with community, the financial issues that impact people in communities, how financial counsellors have been able to assist, and we'll also hear a short video at the end of my presentation from financial counsellors and agency managers that have been working on the ground. Next slide, please. Okay, so what is financial counselling? So it's a free, confidential and independent service, and we work in not-for-profit community organisations. We're generally funded by state and federal governments and are experts in consumer and credit law, hardship processes, counselling, and we work on an empowerment model. We also identify systemic issues in our advocacy and advocate on systemic issues through our casework that we've identified. There are only 900 financial counsellors in Australia, which equates to about 0.4 of a financial counsellor for every 10,000 people. So there's not a lot of us, and we're working hard to change that. We also assist people in financial hardship. And I guess we know that money impacts many aspects of our lives, and we see people for varied and many reasons, including that someone might have lost their job, is unwell, has fled family and domestic violence, or is struggling with debt. Financial counsellors may also specialise in a number of areas, so including family violence, small business, gambling, elder abuse, disaster recovery work, and we have financial counsellors working in the National Redress Scheme for survivors of institutional child sexual abuse. So just to give you a bit of an overview of a generalist case, what that might look like. So you might have someone present that is out of work due to illness. So a financial counsellor would look at options and provide advice on those options for the debts that they have. And we might be able to assist with like a moratorium, which is a break on your mortgage payments. We might be able to negotiate lower payments, and we might also be able to identify income that someone can access either through their super or with Centrelink. So I mentioned earlier that we often identify systemic issues through our casework, and an example of advocacy in recent times that you may have seen on the news was where financial counsellors working in remote parts of Australia with Indigenous communities noticed that there were mis-selling practices within the Telstra stores. This led to the cases being put together collaboratively and taken to the ACCC, where Telstra was fined $50 million, which is the second largest penalty under Australian consumer law. So this was an amazing outcome for the communities that have been impacted by the mis-selling practices and has led to a lot of change. So in a nutshell, financial counsellors assist people with money problems. Next slide, please. Okay, so Financial Counselling Australia's role. So we're the national peak body for financial counselling, and our membership is made up of the states and territory peak bodies. The National Debt Helpline is we oversee the National Debt Helpline, and it's staffed by qualified financial counsellors. It's pretty much the intake process for financial counselling nationally. You can access that service by phone, or there is a chat function on the website. So FCA received funding from the federal government to provide coordination and support as a result of the Black Summer bushfires to 22 funded agencies across South Australia, Victoria, Tasmania, New South Wales and Queensland. And we've worked to support those agencies and financial counsellors through training, data collection and other supports. And we definitely know that the work of disaster recovery is long tail work. Ongoing funding is definitely a challenge for agencies, and we're still seeing people starting to present to financial counselling now, but sadly a lot of that funding will end tomorrow on the 30th of June, and the remaining funding will end for financial counselling services in December 2021. So financial counsellors have a key role to play in financial recovery following disasters. Next slide, please. Okay, so through the work we've done, we've learnt a great deal from the financial counsellors working on the ground. And we know that it's different to our generalist work where we sit in an office behind a desk. It's getting out there, it's the community development approach, connecting with local champions, ensuring good relationships with stakeholders. And definitely we've found an integrated service model approach works best to support people impacted by the fires and ensure they don't have to keep retelling their stories. And some of the innovative ways that we've seen people engage during the bushfires has been, for example, the Winnebago in the picture that we've got on the screen here. So that's the Salvation Army in New South Wales, have a portable office that they can go around in the community and be present. And it's particularly useful where there's not hubs available. We've also spoke to financial counsellors that have established a little office in a local primary school so that when parents drop their children off to school, that they can pop in and have a private space to talk about what's happening for them. Neighbourhood houses, which we know are very connected to their communities and often described as the heart of their communities, have allowed financial counsellors to come in and provide services from there. And innovative ways such as attending local events, community barbecues, stopping by the local men's shed or the local CWA meeting. So we know that financial counselling provides practical help for people in recovery. We'll go to the next slide. Okay, so financial issues. And what we've learned as well is that the people often engaging with us are not our general clients that we would see, and they're often people that have never accessed assistance or services before. So we have a mix of people that have engaged early on, but we've also had a number of people that are just starting to engage now. And I heard the other day of a lady that's just contacted the local financial counselling service and thought she'd be okay, but she's now at the end of her life savings and didn't know where to turn. So, you know, we'd really like to be able to get to those people much earlier. So financial issues that people have been impacted by following the fires have included navigating and accessing the grants, and we've particularly found that small business have found it challenging to navigate the grants process, what they're eligible for and other things. And we've been fortunate that the federal government also funded a small business bushfire financial counselling support line that have been able to support with this work, as well as the local financial counsellors working on the ground. Also access to income. So early on there can be a number of emergency payments that come out, and just raising awareness with people that they can be eligible for those, and also some that may sit inside their insurance policies that they can access to assist with housing. Insurance claims, under insurance and no insurance have been massive issues that we've noted, and Peter will talk a lot more about that in his presentation. But for example, with insurance claims, what we've been surprised by, I guess, a bit is that, you know, there were a number of people being asked to recall what they'd lost within the first 3 weeks of the fires and write lists of what they've lost, and then they put in a claim and they get paid less than what they're insured for. So financial counsellors have been able to go back and review those claims if it's within the first 12 months and help people get the money that they were entitled to get. We can also support with referrals for housing support and other identified needs such as family violence or counselling, because we're usually well connected within our communities with other services. And we support with debts, which is our general work that we would do, so mortgages, personal debt, utilities and other debts. So that we do know that the financial issues are complex and different in this space. Go to the next slide. Thank you. So I thought I'd pick out a example of how one particular agency in their local community has assisted. So of the 22 agencies that were funded, one of the agencies alone has returned $2.2 million through their financial counselling program to the clients of the financial counsellors. So that could be through the insurance claim reviews, as I spoke about earlier. I think that's a large amount of the money. Negotiating debts and moratoriums, and accessing payments such as special utility assistance and grants. So, you know, it can have a huge economic impact on a community by that money coming back in. And it also makes a huge difference between someone being able to rebuild or not if they get the insurance that they're actually covered for. So we might move to the next slide. So in finishing, I'd like to present you with a short video, just with a couple of financial counsellors that have told their thoughts on the role in the work that they do, and also a case study that you might be interested in. So thank you.
Financial counselling traditionally deals with debt and assistance with debt and for overall financial hardship. A lot of our community that we've assisted haven't had debt. They've owned their homes outright, and they may not have been behind in any of their utilities. So they don't know that they don't know they need us until something like this happens. So it's very different work because it's not necessarily around debt. It's around advocacy. It's around also identifying systemic issues that may assist ongoing future disasters and recoveries. It's also mainly about insurances, and then also addressing some of the stuff that may have been there prior to the fires as well.
The common issues, I think, were, loss of property, loss of livelihood. When you put the COVID over the top, there was also the loss of employment. And a lot of people were struggling. That was propped up by the government somehow with their and the bank's grace periods, councils not chasing rates, all those sorts of things. But now those grace periods are finished. That's putting a lot of financial pressure back onto families. And we're seeing that those effects come through in a variety of ways. So a lot more domestic violence reported. So we're seeing a lot more people presenting with domestic violence issues, a lot more mental health issues, and, to a lesser extent, drug and alcohol abuse also, which has been put down as a direct result of the trauma associated with the disaster. 50-50 of those that were insured and those that weren't, and I'm speaking more so in those rural type communities. And of the 50% that were covered, it's probably only 50% of them that were adequately covered, given the new rebuild costs with BALs and everything else associated.
Well, quite often we get the insurance companies which believe people are overinsured with their contents. So they've come to them and asked them to write a comprehensive list of everything they've lost, valuing things as well. So one case I had a lady come to me for help with Centrelink. I asked if she'd like me to review her insurance, and she said that she believed she'd been paid out correctly due to all her neighbours had not received as much as her. When I looked over her insurance, reviewed it, she was actually $98,000 short on what they should have paid her. So slowly we had to go over all of her contents that she had, the list that she had done. She didn't have any internet service while she compiled the list. So therefore, a lot of her costings were way down on where they should have been. So yeah, unfortunately, we had to go back through the trauma, go through room by room and adjust values, add things, and we got the amount back up to $98,000 that she was lacking. And she got that paid out with no problem once we compiled that list. So it's really a matter of reading through their contents. Unfortunately, it is asked if the insurance companies believe they're overinsured in that area and make sure they've got the correct prices for everything, because it is new for old and she didn't understand that either.
Thank you, Julie, and thank you for that video as well. Just a reminder that the long form version of that video will be available with the recording of this webinar after we finished and got it uploaded onto the Knowledge Hub, and you will all be sent a link when that occurs. So I'd now like to welcome Peter Gartland from Financial Counselling Australia. Welcome, Peter. Peter joined Financial Counselling Australia in February 2020, in a national coordination role for bushfire recovery financial counselling. Prior to this, Peter worked as a consultant for 3 years. He was involved with No More Legal Service on the National Redress Scheme for survivors of institutional child sexual abuse. Peter also undertook project roles with the Indigenous Consumer Assistance Network, YFS Logan City and Anglicare East Arnhem. Peter is a director of the Energy and Water Ombudsman Victoria and is independent chair of the Consumer Advisory Panel at Australian Financial Complaints Authority. Formerly, Peter was Executive Officer of Financial Counselling Australia, the peak body for financial counsellors in Victoria from 2010 to 2017. And thank you, Peter, for joining us. Over to you.
Thanks, Amanda, and thanks to Ada for the opportunity for Julie and I to discuss what we consider to be some really important impacts of disasters, in particular the financial and insurance issues. And over the next few minutes, I just want to talk about some of the kind of aggregate numbers that we've discovered and some of the policy issues that we believe are important to discuss with you. I might just go to the next slide, thanks. So I just wanted to start with a story of this fella, Fred, from the mid-north coast, who had fallen behind with his mortgage payment and decided to sell his property. He sold it for $450,000, owing $200 at the time, and was able to sell. But unfortunately, the property burnt down 48 hours before the house was due to be settled in December 2019. The purchaser had the right to walk away, which they did, and the client was left with a property and unfortunately had no insurance. So he's now got a $200,000 debt, property that no one wants to purchase, and he's moved into the local town and he's renting. So the financial counsellor there is advocating with the bank that holds the mortgage over the property. And to date, he's received a lot of generous donations from Australians, which is nearing about $80,000. So I actually had the opportunity to meet Fred, and as we got talking, a couple of things came through. One was, I said to him, why didn't you have any insurance? And he explained to me that his wife, who had died a couple of years earlier, looked after the money. He wasn't the kind of guy that did that. He relied solely on his wife to do that. He cared for her for a number of years, and ultimately was quite distressed after she passed away, and really struggled for a couple of years, and in his own words, lost the plot, meaning that he didn't pay the bills as they came through. So he's ended up with this particular issue. I tell that story because, you know, when we're talking about finance, we're obviously talking about people and their lives, and often through disasters, you know, the more, it's like an onion, the more you peel off, the more you kind of start to drill down into what's happening to people. But that's the kind of situations that that the financial counsellor is helping Fred with to try to figure out what they're going to do. They're not easy stories. They're certainly not black and white, but they do give those, do give an insight into what people are actually going through at the time. So if I could just go to the next slide. When we look at Fred's story in totality, we've been collecting data on behalf of the financial counselling agencies that have been working specifically in bushfire-related areas. And since February 2020 up until recently, there's been around 20,000 conversations that the financial counsellors have had with impacted Australians, but that's resulted more to the point in around about 7,500 casework sessions. And the kind of story that I just described of Fred's is kind of simple, emblematic, I suppose, of those casework sessions. Now we know these facts because we've been collecting the data and giving it to the Department of Social Service and through them to the NBRA. If I just go to the next slide, thank you. So we've learned a lot. We've learned a lot about those 7,500 casework sessions, and the main kind of themes that have come through the casework sessions are on this slide here. So access to grants, we continue to provide support for people impacted by the fires through grants. There's still some grants available. I suppose one of the things we learned when it came to grants was people had to retell their story consistently. And in Fred's case, he had a one-page full of people that were very generous in giving him grants. But he probably had to tell his story about 20 times to get access to the various grants. And I think that's something that I believe that the financial counselling sector going forward can kind of have a greater role in. One of the other big issues that came through was insurance and insurance claims. I note today that we've got some lawyers from community legal centres that would be well across this, but the claims-related issues mostly had to do with areas around debris removal and some issues to do with that. But the bigger issues came through was no insurance and underinsurance. And the recent video of the financial counsellor saying that in rural areas there was around 50% of clients that had no insurance is absolutely correct. I do know that there was an agency down in the southern part of New South Wales that was supporting the shires in, say, Bega Valley, Eurobodalla, Snowy Monaro and Snowy Valley, where they gave out 600 lots of emergency relief. And they did this straw poll of, how many people had insurance or partially insured or fully insured. And of the 600 lots of emergency relief they gave out, 50% had no insurance whatsoever, like none. And the further inland you went from the coastline, the higher the chance there was of not having any insurance. It was amazing. About 25% were underinsured, and 25% felt they had enough insurance. So the issues around the rebuild and how that's going to look into the future, I'll come to in a minute, but that issue around insurance is something that we really need to have a think about. It would come as no surprise that that one of the themes that intersected with the financial issues was mental ill health, and I'm sure a lot of people on this panel, on this session today, would be across the kind of trauma-related issues that impacts on people and continues to do so. The ability for financial counsellors, particularly to work with mental health services in going into local communities to provide support, and part of that kind of integrated approach on the ground with the support of local councils and others was so important, and that led to cross referrals on both sides. It was just such an important thing that we learned. In regards to debts, we certainly assisted people with debts. What we found was that the banking sector, in particular the 4 main banks, did a very good job in the early stages in making sure that that they were able to put essential freezes and moratoriums on those particular debts to enable people some time to be able to consider what their options will be. So they were the kind of main themes that seemed to come through. Next slide, please. So we've learned a lot, and we've learned through this experience and through these 7,500 cases. And I just want to go through and mention a couple before we go to you and your questions and comments. The first is to do with insurance. What we discovered was, in addition to people having no insurance, we found that the people that had insurance were the ones that had to take full responsibility and assume the total risk of how they would estimate their sum insured on their property. So as people would know, if you own a house or an apartment, normally you can have building insurance, and you can also have contents insurance. We don't have an issue with individuals being able to take responsibility for estimating the contents insurance. That's a no-brainer. But when it comes to estimating building insurance, what we've discovered, certainly through the bushfires, is there's a tremendous amount of people that had insurance that thought they were fully insured, only to discover that they were not. The reason why that was the case in a lot of instances was because they have underinsured their properties, and that's because the cost of rebuild is far greater than what people estimated. So in an earlier slide, someone talked about BAL, or bushfire attack level ratings, and for those people on this video today that work at councils, you'd be all across the bushfire attack level ratings. But for those that aren't aware of that, when a property is burnt, irrespective of how that property was initially built, the rebuild has to be in accordance with the bushfire attack level ratings. And those ratings kind of establishes the requirements to construct a bushfire resilient building using particular types of materials. And so a BAL rating, so there's 5 different BAL ratings, and they take into consideration things like the surrounding vegetation, how close the building is to bush, the slope of the land, the local fire danger index, and these kinds of things. And so you can be rated between a BAL 12.5 to up to a BAL FSEG, which is the highest level. The insurance industry themselves estimate that the additional cost for a rebuild based on your BAL rating at the lowest end ranges from between $53,000 extra up until $273,000. Now, this comes from IAG, and IAG is the insurer for insurance companies such as NRMA and CGU and others, and that's their data, not the consumer movements data. So we've seen too many cases of people that felt that they were adequately insured, only to discover, because of the imposition of the BAL rating, the cost of the rebuild is going to increase. So the fact that the insurer is the one that totally assumes that risk is something that we believe we need to move away from. Another issue that we looked at has been because of the Bauer ratings. It's really had an impact on how many properties have been actually rebuilt. And there was an article just recently from the ABC, James Purtill, and he looked at 9 local government areas in New South Wales, and of the 1,300 houses that have been destroyed across 9 shires, less than a quarter have been subject to development applications. So what we're finding is because of the cost of rebuild and because of the combination either of no insurance or underinsurance, this is having a really significant impact on how these local communities are going to look into the future. And at this stage, it's of a concern that that we're not seeing the amount of people moving back into their properties and rebuilding. And that's a really important question, policy question that we've really got to think about. And I think we need, with government and the insurance industry to be reflecting carefully on that. So we've got 2 issues. One is the affordability of premiums going forward and making sure that people are adequately insured. And secondly, when there is a disaster like this and there is a total rebuild, and you need to rebuild in accordance with new building compliance measures, what that's going to look like. Another thing that we've learned is that in a disaster, the bank's response generally has been very positive. And I kind of talk about the main 4 banks there because we've got some communication with them. And when I say, but watch out, it's just a reflection of the fact that moratorium periods and periods of grace and the ability of banks to be flexible has been good. But I suspect that we are going to start to see, times where banks are going to be wanting to be calling in on those particular debts. And again, with the overlay of COVID and all of the measures from COVID starting to finish up now, what happens into the future will be something that we're going to have to look at. In terms of the financial counselling, and our role, and I note that the small business bushfire financial counsellors are some of us with us today, and Financial Counselling Victoria and the rural FCs are here as well as the CLCs. Our work really needs to begin when the disaster occurs, and as I say, that needs to potentially start with grants, because that's the immediate kind of thing that people normally present with. So our work seems to be kind of long tail that starts with grants, moves through potentially with support with insurance, and then connecting them with specialist legal advice, and then through to assistance with debts and other kind of issues. So we kind of would like to see that in terms of our sector, the financial counselling sector, and all those organisations I've just mentioned before, that into the future that we're going to, we will be a permanent part of the emergency management work, and therefore, connecting in with AIDA and other emergency management bodies that are on this on this training session today. This is something that we're really very keen on being part of your work and embedding that. Just to finish up, I'll go to just the last slide, and on the last slide is Julie's details and my details, also the Financial Counselling Australia, as well as the small business bushfire line. I've probably missed out on a couple of others, but there's our details, and feel free to take them down and give us a call if you'd like to discuss things further.
Thanks so much, Peter, and thank you, Julie, as well for your presentation and for sharing your insights and some really interesting data there now, Peter, that you spoke to about numbers of properties actually being subject to development applications for rebuilds and what that means for communities being able to sort of recover at that sort of community level, and what that means for social cohesion and all those sorts of issues. Look, we've had a number of questions come through. We've got about 15 minutes for Q&A. So I'll just go to some of them now, Peter and Julie, and obviously people can continue to ask questions as we go. But our first question is, what are your thoughts on the role that financial counsellors could play or not in the planning and preparation sides of disaster risk reduction? it sounds like there are a lot of lessons learned that could help in household preparation in non-crisis periods, such as properly documenting household contents and some of the things Julie spoke to. So what are some of the practical things that people can do and from your experience can help should a disaster strike? Over to you, Peter.
Well, I'm sure Julie will have some comments here. There's no doubt of the importance of community-based education programs, I think, Amanda, particularly in rural areas around the whole issue of insurance and not only just insurance affordability, but also, as it currently stands, with the issue of how a consumer can properly be assured that the sum insured that they have on their policy is the right one, and that in the event of a disaster, that they'll have that information. And I think there's a need for a community-based program that can work with communities. It's always difficult if the insurance industry does it, because the minute the insurance industry does it, then they'll be accused by consumers of simply lining their own pockets by having increase in insurance premiums. But that doesn't mean that they're left off the hook. I really believe that the insurance industry has a role in providing decent advice to consumers around how much they should be able to afford. There's no shortage of information on websites about the importance of keeping lists and really simple kind of tools around having important documents in maybe with a friend or a family that isn't in that particular potential bushfire related area. And this also applies for floods as well. And we've had experiences in New South Wales recently where we've had people impacted by the floods, and I don't need to tell people from North Queensland about the same thing. So, simple things such as having lists and having them with others and keeping them online is another option. But I might go to you, Julie, and get your comments.
Yeah, it's certainly something we've been thinking about in the work that we've been doing, is that we'd like to be able to leave, I guess, a bit of guidance for agencies and for financial counselling as a profession into what could be done. And I know that some agencies locally are going out doing some of the education work now, but the issue is that it's a little too late. So I think definitely the preventative work is incredibly important. It's just finding for our sector having the capacity to do it, because we're challenged by funding all the time. But definitely community-based programs, I guess communities that are at risk of disasters taking on those type of programs and finding funding to present those in a way that's going to support people to not understand insurance and what their needs are.
I know after the Black Saturday bushfires in 2009 in Victoria, the Royal Commission made some recommendations around hazard management agencies, including advice around adequate insurance in their community education programs. And I know CFA has certainly taken that on in Victoria, and I think other agencies have done that to integrate that advice in their bushfire preparedness programs. And we might go to another question. We've had a number of questions, so I'll try and get through as many as we can. How do you manage insurance hesitancy or mistrust? So this notion that it's too expensive to insure and you may not get a claim paid out in the past. So, people sort of think they'll take on the risk themselves. How do you sort of deal with people having those attitudes?
Yeah, it's difficult. Look, as I said earlier, Amanda, the fact that if the information does come from insurers, it is tainted because of the very nature of the fact that they are the ones that are selling the product. But at the same time, you want to make sure that people are fully informed when they make decisions. And that's where I think, as I said earlier, we need to look at ways of informing people about the sum insured. At the moment, if you have a bush block and you want to make sure that you're adequately insured, you can pay $1,000 and get a rating, get a BAL rating, and then you can get someone in to cost that, and then you add 15-20%, and that's what your sum insured is. But people don't have $2,000 up front to do that kind of thing. So we've got to be thinking differently about how we do this. And I think that there are some important policy issues. So, for example, one option could be that you have different kinds of building insurance. So like a premium building insurance level, a silver insurance level, and maybe a standard insurance level. These kinds of things. The other thing is that technically speaking, there's nothing that prevents an insurer insuring a property for replacement value. Okay, so therefore it doesn't mean it's up to the individual to estimate, because if there's a replacement value, then the insurer is obliged under the Insurance Contracts Act to be able to rebuild according to the replacement value. Unfortunately, hardly any of them do it. So again, it gets back to the fact that we need to be thinking about different policy issues. And my final point is that in the north of Australia recently, the federal government have intervened, and I think that's important because it means that there is certain market failure, and they have intervened by introducing a reinsurance pool in Northern Australia, meaning that potentially some of the costs of rebuild would be offset by that potential pool. And we think that that's worth considering in other parts, particularly in bushfire-related areas.
Thanks, Peter. I might go to the next question and throw this to you, Julie. What do you think would make it better and easier for individuals and small business to navigate the grants process?
I think a simplified process where I know Thriving Communities Partnership have been working on a portal where people tell their story once in relation to family violence. So a tool, something like that. I know that small businesses found it difficult because they had to get a lot of financial details from accountants, and they didn't have the money to even pay upfront to do that. So perhaps some grants some money included in the grants to assist in actually completing the grants and having all that financial detail that's required. And also, having people in the recovery hubs supporting with that. I know that does happen in some communities, which is fantastic, but people to assist in completing the grant forms and navigating what they can access.
Australians are really generous, just to add from Julie, Australians are really generous, and the bushfires in particular demonstrated the generosity, just amazing. I suppose one thing I'd say is the importance of having potentially a standard grant application form that could be agreed to by all of those organisations that are contributing donations to individuals. One of the frustrations that have come through from the financial counsellors working on the ground is that people have to retell their story. Now, okay, I get that people have to retell their story in certain areas, but it shouldn't have to be in grants. So Fred, the guy that I met with, he had to retell his story to 20 odd different grants organisations. And we if we could get an agreement between the donors that there's a generic form that everyone agrees to, and people don't have to, and we can just distribute it, then that would make everyone's life so much easier.
Well, that's something that perhaps we could work on with you, a bit of a toolkit or something like that. So always looking for opportunities to work with our partners, and that's something that could be done, pre-disaster as part of our preparedness planning. So
yeah,
we'll add that to the list, Peter and Julie.
That's great.
What do you both see are the opportunities to work more closely with industry? So, financial services industry like bankers and insurers to improve assistance provided both, pre and post disaster. And what could some of those opportunities be?
Well, I might start, and Julie, you can add. The sector. This sector traditionally coming from a consumer kind of approach, in the olden days used to have very much an adversarial approach, and when people like me were younger and had long hair, we were organising demos in with debt collectors and things like that. But a lot of that's changed, and that's because of the imposition of improved laws and policies, and as well as banks and others understanding that Australians are in financial difficulty often because they don't want to be, but they just are. And so there has been a mind change by the banks in recent times. Now, they're not perfect, and I'm certainly not a flag bearer for them, but we do have a mature relationship with banks. We sit on a number of consumer consultative committees with the Australian Bankers Association, with the Insurance Council of Australia, IAG. There's a whole lot of engagement that we have. So we've got a really good opportunity to, through this experience, to raise these issues, which we are raising with them. Make no mistake, they are the insurance industry. The banking sector, they're well aware of the concerns that we're seeing on the ground, and I suppose because we do have a relatively trusted relationship, then when hopefully we're able to advance from a policy perspective some of the issues that we've been discussing today.
Thanks, Peter. And Julie?
Yeah, I'll just also add, so at a state-based and a local level, that there's always conversations with the banks to improve hardship practices and the way that they reach out to clients. And a lot of financial counsellors are very strong in their advocacy, which is amazing. And they often sit on round tables and different opportunities that present with banks to provide the client stories, which I think really tell what's happening and when improvements can be made.
I'm going to move on to a question that's related to this. So this Recovery Matters webinar that we're running with you today is on financial counselling matters, but we've run them with the GAD-POD on issues of family violence or gendered responses. We've run them with local government. We've run with a range of partners. So, there's a broad theme here about how do we help people to return to, normal, whatever normal is. How do we support them? So in the context of financial counselling, this person asking this question is interested in the role of the counselling part of financial counselling. So how do we best support people to return to normal after disaster, when often that requires, significant business, financial or lifestyle upheaval, which can seem, quite traumatic and scary for the individuals, involved. So how, as counsellors, can you best support people through that decision making?
So our role in counselling is very much in connecting and building a rapport with the client and identifying issues. So we're not therapeutic counsellors, so we would work very closely to support clients for warm referrals to those services. But definitely, I think taking the financial stress off people, or sometimes where there is significant trauma, and I come from my experience in family violence work, just giving people the space to be able to make decisions again, because they're not in that space. So we can often put debts on hold or communicate with creditors what's actually happening, and they're very open to listening these days on compassionate grounds. So we can buy that space for people and then support them in accessing the therapeutic services that they might need. So I guess coupled with having the financial things on hold and knowing that you can make decisions yourself, that someone's not taking those decisions out of your hands. So you can come back and make the decisions when you're ready to, along with therapeutic counselling. It supports people to find their new normal moving forward. Yeah.
Thanks. And Peter, did you want to talk about the counselling aspect of your work?
Look, certainly in the relief stage, Amanda, the last thing that someone wants to talk to, when they hear the word financial counselling, it's a bit of a misnomer, because people would say, I don't need any counselling to do with my finances, I've just lost my house. And that's fair enough. So as Julie said, we don't financial counsellors don't kind of counsel people on their finances from a behavioural point of view, rather, work alongside people, and certainly with the bushfire experience and the flooding experience, it's really more about, what can I do to take something off your hands as a means of engaging and building the trust. The other issue is the other approach has been to work very carefully with mental health services and trauma-informed services and and to collaborate effectively with those organisations, particularly, and I had the opportunity, as others would have in this session today, to go into really small hamlets where there's just a town hall, and we go in there with the mental health worker, and we're just there and hopefully providing a human face. But as Julie indicated, the ability of those individual financial counsellors to have good relations with banks, local counsellors, insurers, mental health services means that things can be done expeditiously and hopefully can take at least one thing off their shoulders.
So we're used to hearing the term climate refugees, but often we sort of have thought of that as being potentially people in the Pacific dealing with rising sea levels and so on. But now, obviously, in Australia, we're seeing people impacted by bushfires and floods at a scale not seen previously. So are you seeing people who've become financially vulnerable for the first time as a result of these types of disasters you're working with people on?
Yes, there's absolutely no doubt about it. I mean, in a lot of ways, natural disasters, I need to stop using the word natural, the disasters themselves, they don't discriminate, and everyone's impacted. I suppose the people that we've assisted the most have been people that have that where there are challenges financially, but there's no doubt on the assumption that people here agree that climate change is one of the drivers of the increase in disasters that we continue to see this. When we got involved, I mean, we're involved with, our services are involved with the 2009 fires, and I've seen people that are on this session today that were directly involved with clients at the time. And so we've continued to be involved, but it's really struck me in recent times that at the moment we're supporting the Springfield Lakes hailstorm damage from Halloween last November, through to the floods in New South Wales, the fires in the Perth Hills, and as well as the cyclones. So we're increasingly seeing this, and therefore it's going to affect more Australians, Amanda, and as a result, people of all income levels. I suppose when these disasters happen, the ones that it impacts the most are people that don't have the ability financially to be able to recover, or are going to be for years upon years struggling to get back to where they were. And they're the people that we're seeing on an increasing scale that concerns us.
Thanks, Peter. So people on this webinar today are interested in any sort of preparedness resources or training or exercises that they could implement, within their own communities as part of their community engagement work. Can you, either of you, point people to some good resources? I saw someone in the chat earlier posted about Good Shepherd resources. So can you just mention a few that people can turn to?
Yes, so yeah, I think the Good Shepherd resource is definitely worth looking at. There's a range of preparedness documents that are out there, as well as even if you go onto the Insurance Council of Australia's website, dare I say it, there's a lot of information there that's preventative in nature. We'll put some things together and send it through to you, Amanda, and if you can, and feel free to distribute that. But there's no shortage of preparedness kind of documents that are there for individual consumers, or who I take you're referring to, who may be impacted by disaster into the future, that we can certainly give that out to.
Thanks very much, Peter, and thank you, Julie. We will certainly take you up on that offer, and we'll curate some resources to go out when this webinar is uploaded to our Knowledge Hub. I think that's about all we have time for the Q&A session. So thank you again both for your time today, for sharing your insights. It's certainly very valuable to hear what you have been working on with the Financial Counselling Australia, and we really appreciate your time today. I'd like to let you know that this webinar will be uploaded to the Knowledge Hub shortly. You'll receive an email when that occurs. In fact, everyone who registered will receive an email that it's available. When you exit today's Zoom session, you'll be asked to complete a short survey. We use this data to inform what we do going forward with our professional development program. So please take a minute or two to fill it in. And I'd also like to briefly bring your attention to another program that AIDA runs, the Resilient Australia Awards. And currently the People's Choice Photography Award voting is underway. We would encourage you to vote on the AIDA Facebook page, and the events team has just shared a link with you in the chat. So please put your vote in. The national awards are presented at a ceremony in November each year, and the photography award is one of those categories, so we would really encourage you to get involved. It's been a pleasure to again host one of our Recovery Matters webinars this afternoon. Thank you all for joining us, and until next time, stay safe and farewell.